The war drums stopped the instant Gromma Frostwolf spat at War Chief Ragnak Skarn's feet. Firelight from the great bonfire threw huge shadows across the hide tents of the Frostwolf war camp, and every orc in the clan's circle went silent, waiting to see what their chief would do to the woman who had just refused him in front of everyone. Ragnak stood a full head taller than most men in the camp, his tusks yellowed with age, his shoulders wrapped in the pelt of a mountain bear he had killed with his bare hands. He had offered Gromma his claim cord, the braided leather strip that would have bound her to him as his third wife, before the whole clan, expecting her to bow her head as every other woman had. Instead, she had knocked it from his hand. "I will not be given to you like a haunch of meat, Ragnak," she said, her voice carrying over the crackle of the fire. She was 24 summers old, built like the warriors around her but leaner, quicker, her green-gray skin catching the firelight along the hard lines of her arms. She wore fitted leather war leathers laced tight at the waist, a battle skirt split for the run, and a fur-lined vest that hugged her frame without hiding the strength beneath it. Twin curved tusks framed a mouth that had never learned to lie. "I have killed for this clan. I have bled for this clan. I will choose my own mate or I will choose none." Ragnak's jaw worked. Somewhere in the crowd an old woman gasped. No one refused a war chief's claim cord, not without cost. "You dishonor me before my people," Ragnak said, low and dangerous, stepping close enough that his shadow swallowed her. "You dishonor yourself. I dishonor no one by refusing to be owned." He struck her then, an open-handed blow that would have staggered a lesser warrior, and the crack of it silenced even the fire. Gromma's head snapped sideways. Blood welled at the corner of her mouth. She straightened slowly, met his eyes, and did not fall. "Strike me again," she said, "and see if I do not strike back, chief or not." The murmur that ran through the crowd was not outrage at her insolence. It was something closer to awe, and Ragnak heard it and hated her for it. He could not kill her. Her father had been too well loved, too recently dead in battle at Ragnak's own side, and killing his hero's daughter over a spurned claim cord would cost him more than it gained. But he could not let this stand either. A chief who could be refused was a chief who could be challenged, so he chose the cruelest mercy he had. "Then you have no clan," he said, loud enough for every fire-lit face to hear. "You are cast out. Frostwolf blood no longer runs in your veins by my word. You will walk the human roads alone, Gromma, daughter of no one, and when the winter finds you begging at some farmer's gate, remember it was pride that put you there." He turned, sweeping his fur cloak around, and threw his final words over his shoulder like a curse. "No one will claim her here. Let her see if any soft human dog wants a used-up orc bitch with no clan to protect her. She will crawl back before the first snow, or she will die out there, and either way I am rid of the shame of her." They took her weapons. They took her tent. They gave her 3 days of food and pointed her down the mountain path toward the human lands, and the whole camp watched her go with her spine straight and her chin high, though her lip was still bleeding and her eyes burned with something that was not quite tears. She did not look back once. 4 months later, on the long gravel ribbon of the pilgrim road that wound between the shrine towns of the border country, Ezekiel Fletcher was thinking about how tired he was of guarding people who never said thank you. He was 26, broad through the shoulders from years of drilling with a spear he was only middling good with, and he wore the faded blue tabard of the Thistledown Crossing Town Guard over a leather jerkin patched at the elbows. His fair hair stuck to his forehead in the autumn damp. He was not a large man, not compared to the merchant's hired swords or the mounted knights, who sometimes passed through escorting pilgrims to the shrine of St. Ilva at the road's end. But he was steady, and steady counted for something on a road full of bandits and worse. He had been assigned, along with 2 other guardsmen, to escort a merchant's wagon train from Thistledown crossing to the Wayhouse at Elder's Bend, a half-day's ride further down the Pilgrim Road. It should have been simple. It was not simple, because 3 men on horseback had come out of the tree line, an hour past noon with drawn blades, and a demand for the strongbox. And Ezekiel's two fellow guardsmen were currently lying in the mud with crossbow bolts in them. And Ezekiel was standing alone between the wagon and the road with nothing but a spear and a shield, and the absolute certainty that he was about to die for a merchant who had complained about the price of the escort the entire journey. "Last chance, boy," the lead bandit said. He had a scar through one eyebrow and a crossbow already reloading in his lap. "Strongbox or you join your friends." Ezekiel's mouth was dry. His spear hand was shaking, though he tried to still it. He thought absurdly of his mother's kitchen back in Thistledown Crossing, of the way she used to hum while she kneaded bread, and he thought that it would be a stupid thing to die thinking about bread. And then the world changed. Something came out of the trees on the far side of the road that was not a man. She hit the second bandit's horse broadside with a shoulder like a battering ram, and horse and rider both went down in a scream of dust and terror. Ezekiel had one confused instant to register green-gray skin, a mane of dark hair bound back with a leather cord, and a body wrapped in fitted travel leathers. A bodice lay snug over a lean, powerful torso, a long skirt slit high for movement, bracers strapped tight over forearms corded with muscle, before she tore a fence post out of the roadside ditch like it was a dry twig, and used it to knock the lead bandit clean off his horse. The third bandit got one shot off. The bolt grazed her upper arm, and she did not so much as flinch. She closed the distance in 3 strides, wrenched the crossbow from his hands, and broke it over her knee before backhanding him into the ditch hard enough that he did not get up again. Then there was silence except for the wind in the trees and the moaning of the man with the broken arm. Ezekiel stood frozen, spear still half raised, staring at her. She was breathtaking in a way that had nothing to do with softness. Tusks tall and proud, framed a mouth currently curled in contempt for the men groaning in the road. Her eyes were a startling amber gold, sharp and assessing, and they moved over Ezekiel now with the same measuring look she'd given the bandits, except this time she did not attack. She only tilted her head, taking in the way he had not run, the way he had planted himself between the wagon and the horsemen even with 2 of his companions down. "You are still standing," she said. Her voice was low, rough at the edges, faintly accented in a way that turned the common tongue into something more musical than it had any right to be. "Most men your size run." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I was about to, probably, if you hadn't." Something that might have been amusement flickered at the corner of her mouth. Honest, at least. The merchant, a soft round man named Corliss Pell, finally poked his head out of the wagon, took one look at the orc woman standing amid 3 unconscious bandits, and let out a shriek that startled a flock of crows from the tree line. "Guardsman! Guardsman! There's an orc, do something." "She just saved your strongbox, Master Pell," Ezekiel said, lowering his spear at last, though his heart was still hammering. "And likely my life. I don't care what she did, get it away from the wagon." Gromma's expression flattened into something cold. She had heard that tone before, in every human town she had passed through in the last 4 months, the tone of a man who saw a monster before he saw a woman, no matter what she did to earn his safety. She had grown used to walking wide around villages, sleeping in the tree line, taking what work she could from farmers desperate enough to hire an orc for a day's harvest, and then send her on her way before dark so the neighbors would not talk. She had not expected kindness on this road. She had learned not to expect it anywhere. She turned to go. "Wait," Ezekiel said. She stopped, looked back at him over her shoulder, wary, ready to be struck at or spat on or worse. "Thank you," he said simply. "I mean it, you didn't have to step in." Gromma studied him for a long moment. Rain had begun to mist down, beating on her dark hair on the leather at her shoulders. Up close he could see the fading bruise along her jaw, weeks old, half-healed, the kind of mark that came from a blow, not a fight. He wondered who had put it there and found, to his own surprise, that he wanted very badly to know so he could hate them properly. "No," she agreed. "I did not." She glanced at the moaning bandits. "But I do not care for men who shoot from cover at boys with spears." A pause. "You held your ground, That is worth something where I come from. Where do you come from? Something shuddered behind her amber eyes. Nowhere anymore. And then she turned and walked into the trees, and though Ezekiel called after her to at least let him see to the wound on her arm, she was gone before he'd finished the sentence, swallowed by the wet autumn forest as if she had never been there at all, except for 3 unconscious bandits and a splintered crossbow in the road as proof that she had. He did not see her again for 11 days, though he thought about her every single one of them. He told his captain, a weathered old soldier named Aldous Marsh, who ran the Thistledown Crossing garrison with a fair hand and a tired heart, exactly what had happened on the road, leaving nothing out. Marsh had listened, chewing the end of an unlit pipe, and then said only, "An orc who kills bandits and takes no reward is either a saint or a very patient predator. Keep your eyes open, Fletcher, but don't go picking fights with her if she comes through again. We've enough trouble on that road without inviting more." Ezekiel had not gone looking for a fight. He had, if he was honest with himself, gone looking for her. On every patrol he could volunteer for along the stretch of road nearest the tree line where she had vanished. And 11 days later, on a foggy gray morning with frost silvering the roadside shrines, he found her, or rather, she let herself be found, sitting on the crumbling steps of an old wayside shrine to some forgotten saint, wrapping a strip of cloth around the crossbow wound on her arm that had clearly gone untreated and was now an angry, swollen red. "That needs cleaning," Ezekiel said, dismounting before he'd even fully thought it through. Gromma looked up, unsurprised, as though she had heard his horse coming from half a mile off, which she probably had. "It is healing. It is festering." He crouched a respectful distance away, opening the saddlebag where he kept a small kit of clean linen and a flask of spirits for exactly this sort of thing, though he'd never expected to use it on an orc warrior on a pilgrim shrine step. "May I?" She looked at his offered hands for a long moment. He held very still, letting her decide, aware suddenly of how close he was to a creature who could break his spine like kindling if she chose, and equally aware that some part of him was not afraid at all, only hopeful. "Why would you help me?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Your people call my kind monsters. I have heard it said of me in every town on this road." "My people are wrong about a lot of things," Ezekiel said, and meant it. "I watched you save a wagon full of strangers and ask for nothing. That tells me more than what anyone shouts from a tavern doorway." She held out her arm. His hands were careful, gentle in a way that made something unfamiliar twist in her chest as he cleaned the wound with the spirits. She hissed once at the sting but did not pull away, and wrapped it properly in clean linen. His fingers were rough with callus from spearwork, but his touch was light, deliberate, the touch of a man being careful with something he thought mattered. No one had touched her like that since before Ragnar's hand had split her lip. No one human, certainly. No one at all if she counted honestly. "There," Ezekiel said, tying off the linen. "Should heal clean now. You are a strange man, Ezekiel Fletcher." She had learned his name from the frightened merchant's grateful retelling in the last town, apparently. Word traveled fast on the pilgrim road. A guardsman who bandages orcs and expects no reward. "You saved my life. Seemed only fair." Fair. She tested the word like it tasted unfamiliar. "There is very little fair where I have been." "Where have you been?" he asked, and this time she did not shudder the question away entirely. "Exiled," she said, and watched his face for the flinch, the fear, the recoil she had come to expect at that word. Exile meant something had gone wrong badly enough that a clan cast out its own, and humans assumed the worst of any orc who wandered without a clan mark. "My chief wished to claim me as a wife. I refused him before the whole camp. He could not forgive that." Ezekiel did not flinch. If anything, something in his expression sharpened, protective and outraged on her behalf. "He struck you for saying no." "He struck me for saying no in front of people who might have thought less of him for it." She touched her own jaw unconsciously where the bruise had faded to yellow-green. "He told the whole camp no one would claim me out here, that I would crawl back begging before the first snow or die in the human lands with no clan to protect me." Her mouth twisted, bitter and proud all at once. I have not crawled back. I do not intend to." "Good," Ezekiel said, with a fierceness that surprised them both. "You shouldn't have to crawl back to anyone who thinks a woman is his to claim like property." Gromma looked at him for a long moment, this ordinary, unremarkable human man with tired eyes and careful hands and a spine that had not bent even facing down bandit crossbows, and felt something shift inside her chest that she did not have a name for yet. "You are the first human who has said that to me," she said quietly. "Then the rest of them are fools," Ezekiel said, and helped her to her feet. She did not vanish into the trees this time. She walked with him as far as the outskirts of Thistledown Crossing, keeping to the shadow of the tree line while he walked his horse on the road proper, and when he asked, awkwardly, whether she had anywhere to sleep that night, she admitted grudgingly, as though the admission cost her something, that she did not, that she had been sleeping rough for 4 months in whatever shelter the wilds offered, and that winter was coming faster than her supplies. "There's an old grain shed behind the garrison stable," Ezekiel said. "Not much, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. Captain Marsh won't mind if I ask him right. You'd be safe there. Your townsfolk will not thank you for housing an orc behind their walls." "My townsfolk," Ezekiel said, "can mind their own business." That was easier said than done, as it turned out, but it was the beginning. A grain shed with a roof that only leaked in one corner. A captain who grumbled but did not forbid it, once Ezekiel told him honestly what she had done on the road, and a fierce orc woman who began slowly to let herself believe that perhaps not every human dog bit the hand offered to it. Word got around Thistledown Crossing within 3 days that the town guard was sheltering an orc woman behind the garrison, and the town did not take it well. Ezekiel felt the shift the moment he walked into the market square that morning, conversations dying as he passed, eyes following him with a mixture of suspicion and open hostility. An old woman at the bread stall making a warning sign with her fingers, as though he himself had become tainted by association. By midday, a small crowd had gathered outside the garrison gates, and at the front of it stood Corliss Pell, the merchant Gromma had saved, looking somehow both grateful and furious at the same time, as if he could not decide which feeling he was entitled to. "You cannot keep that thing in this town," Pell said, jabbing a finger toward the stable yard where Gromma stood with her arms crossed, watching the gathering crowd with a stillness that Ezekiel had come to recognize as the calm before a storm, not fear, never fear, but a controlled fury that had learned, through hard experience, not to show itself too soon. "My wife will not walk the market road if there's an orc loose in this town." "She's not loose," Ezekiel said, standing between the crowd and the stable yard without quite deciding to. "She's a guest of the garrison under my protection, and she saved your strongbox and likely your life 11 days ago, Master Pell, in case your memory's grown short. That doesn't change what she is." "What is she then?" Ezekiel asked, and something in his voice had gone hard in a way that surprised even him. "A woman who fought off 3 armed bandits alone to save a wagon full of strangers who'd never done a kindness for her. Sounds to me like exactly the sort of neighbor a decent town would want." A murmur ran through the crowd, uncertain, some faces softening slightly at the reminder, others hardening further at the challenge in his tone. An old farmhand near the back spat in the dust. "Orcs killed my brother at the Kelder Ford fighting. I don't care what one green-skinned bitch did on the road, they're all the same underneath." Gromma's jaw tightened at the slur, but she did not move, did not speak, only watched with those sharp amber eyes as though cataloging every face that had turned against her, filing it away the way a soldier remembers a battlefield. "That's enough," came another voice, and Captain Aldous Marsh pushed through the crowd, his old bones moving slower than his authority, which still carried weight in this town after 30 years of service. "She's done nothing in my town but keep to herself and mend fences for old Widow Halloway, who by the way has nothing but praise for her manners, which is more than I can say for some of you gathered here shouting outside my gate. Go home, all of you. There's no orc raid coming, just a woman minding her business, and if any of you touch a hair on her head without cause, you'll answer to me and the town charter both." The crowd dispersed slowly, grumbling, casting backward glances, but they dispersed, and Ezekiel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That night he found Gromma sitting on an overturned crate outside the grain shed, staring up at the cold, clear stars, her breath fogging in the autumn air. He brought 2 cups of hot cider from the garrison kitchen and offered her one, which she took after a moment's hesitation, wrapping both hands around the warmth of it. "You did not have to defend me today," she said. "It will cost you standing in this town. I have seen how they look at you now since you took me in. Let them look. They could turn on you, strip your position, worse." "Then they'd be wrong to do it," Ezekiel said simply, settling onto the ground near her crate, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her despite the cold night. "I've spent my whole life being the guardsman nobody notices, Gromma. Not the fastest with a spear, not the strongest arm on the wall, not the captain's favorite. I do my rounds, I keep my head down. I go home to an empty house every night and eat supper alone. Nobody's ever looked at me the way that crowd looked at you today, like I mattered enough to be afraid of, or angry at, or anything at all." He turned to look at her, firelight from the distant garrison torches catching the line of her jaw, the proud curve of her tusks, the surprising softness in her amber eyes when she looked back at him. "You're the first thing that's happened to me in years that made me feel like standing up mattered. I'm not going to stop now because a few frightened farmers don't like it." Gromma was quiet for a long moment, turning the cup in her hands. "Where I come from," she said finally, "a warrior does not thank another for standing beside them in a fight. It is expected if the bond is real. But you are not a warrior of my clan, Ezekiel Fletcher, and you had no bond to me, no debt, no claim." She looked at him then fully, amber eyes steady on his face. "And still you stood, twice now." "I'll keep standing," he said, "as long as you'll let me." Something shifted in her expression, not quite a smile. Orcs did not smile the way humans did, their faces built differently around those proud tusks, but something warm flickered at the corners of her mouth, something that made his heart trip over itself. "Then I suppose," she said slowly, as if testing the shape of the words, "I will let you." The weeks that followed felt, to Ezekiel, like the first real color that had touched his life in years. Gromma began riding patrol with him along the Pilgrim Road. Unofficially at first, Captain Marsh turned a careful blind eye, especially after she single-handedly hauled a supply wagon out of a mud sink that had defeated 4 horses and 2 oxen, and after she spotted a bandit ambush from a full half-mile off by the way birds scattered wrong from a stand of trees, a skill no human scout on the garrison payroll possessed. Within a month, Marsh was paying her, grudgingly, quietly, in coins slipped to Ezekiel to pass along because half the garrison still would not speak to her directly. She did not seem to mind. She had never expected to be liked here. She had only wanted. She told Ezekiel one evening as they sat sharing a meal of stew and hard bread at the garrison's long table, long after the other guardsmen had gone to their bunks, a place where she was not hunted. "Hunted?" he asked, some old unease sharpening the word. "Ragnarok declared me forfeit," she said, staring into her bowl. "When a clan exiles one of its own for refusing a claim, the old law says she is unclaimed, no clan's protection, no clan's vengeance if harm comes to her. Any who capture her may claim her as their own, present her before the chief who cast her out as proof of dominance, or simply keep her as spoils. It is meant to be a mercy, in the old telling, better than death. In truth it means any bounty hunter, any rival clan, any slaver with enough men and enough greed may hunt me for sport or profit, and Ragnarok loses nothing either way. If they bring me back broken to his feet, his pride is restored. If they simply take me for themselves, he is rid of the shame of me entirely." Her hands tightened around the wooden bowl. "I have been running from that hunt for 4 months, Ezekiel. I did not tell you before because I did not want you to look at me, the way this town already does, as a danger to be rid of. Ezekiel reached across the table slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and closed his hand over hers where it gripped the bowl. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "and if anyone comes down this road looking to collect you like a bounty, they'll have to go through me first." "You do not understand what you are offering," Gromma said, though she did not pull her hand away. "These are not farmers with pitchforks, Ezekiel. Bounty hunters who chase orc exiles are killers. Some are orc themselves, warriors seeking glory or coin from rival clans. You are one man with a spear, you are, forgive me, only middling with." "I know exactly what I'm offering," Ezekiel said, and there was no hesitation in it at all. "I've spent 26 years being ordinary, Gromma. Nobody's ever needed me for anything more than walking a wall at night. If the first thing worth fighting for that's ever come into my life needs someone willing to stand between her and a hunting party, then that's what I'll be. I'm not asking you to need saving. I've seen what you can do to 3 armed men without breaking stride. I'm asking you to let me stand with you anyway." For a long moment she only looked at him, something fierce and unguarded moving behind her amber eyes, and then slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand beneath his so their fingers laced together on the rough wooden table. "No one has ever asked to stand with me," she said quietly. "Only to own me, or to fear me, or to use what I can do and send me on my way after." Her thumb traced once over his knuckles, a small motion that sent heat straight up his arm. "You are a strange man, Ezekiel Fletcher. Ordinary you call yourself. I have not met a man braver." He turned his hand further, cradling hers properly, and for a moment neither of them spoke at all, the garrison hall quiet around them but for the crackle of the hearth fire, and something unspoken and enormous settling into the space between their joined hands. The bounty hunters came 11 days later, on a gray afternoon thick with the smell of coming snow. There were 4 of them, 3 humans and 1 half-orc tracker with a nose ring through a scarred nostril, riding into Thistledown Crossing's market square as though they owned the road beneath their horses' hooves. Their leader was a lean, hard-eyed man named Silas Crane, dressed in dark leathers with a crossbow slung across his back, and a coil of heavy chain hanging from his saddle horn that made Ezekiel's stomach turn the moment he saw it. "We're looking for an orc woman," Crane announced to the market square at large, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of stalls and shoppers. "Green-skinned, tall, travels alone, calls herself Frostwolf. There's a bounty out of the western clans, 200 silver crowns for her delivered alive to War Chief Ragnock Skarn, or 100 for proof of her death. We've tracked her sign this far down the Pilgrim Road. Anyone gives us information leading to her, there's coin in it for you." The square went very quiet. Several eyes flicked, unwillingly, toward the garrison stables, and Crane's gaze followed them with the sharp interest of a hunting dog scenting blood. Ezekiel was there within the hour, having heard the news from a breathless stable boy who'd run the whole way, and he found Crane and his men already at the garrison gates, arguing with Captain Marsh, who stood with his arms crossed and his old face set like stone. "I've no orc bounty here," Marsh was saying, which was, strictly, true in the sense that he had never officially registered Gromma as anything other than an occasional hired hand. "Don't play me for a fool, old man," Crane said. "Half this town's been gossiping about the garrison sheltering a green-skinned woman for a month now. We just want to talk to her." "You want to chain her and drag her off for coin," Ezekiel said, stepping up beside his captain, and Crane's sharp eyes swung to him with new interest. "And you'd be the guardsman I've heard about, the one keeping her." Crane's mouth curled, not quite a smile. "Bold thing, laying claim to another man's bounty. Though I suppose you've had your use of her, whatever else." The insult landed like a slap, and it took every ounce of Ezekiel's control not to put his fist through Crane's teeth right there in the market square. "She's not property and she's not a bounty. She's under the protection of this garrison, and if you or your men lay a hand on her, you'll answer for it under the town charter same as anyone." Crane laughed, an ugly, unhurried sound. "Town charter don't mean much against clan law, boy, and clan law says she's forfeit, but we're not unreasonable men. We'll camp at the Way House tonight, give you time to think it over, Talk some sense to your captain here. 200 crowns is a lot of coin to throw away on a green-skinned stray, and I'd wager this whole garrison could use it more than one exile orc needs her freedom. He wheeled his horse and rode off toward Elder's Bend Wayhouse with his men, leaving a chill in the market square that had nothing to do with the coming winter. That night, Ezekiel found Gromma standing in the grain shed doorway, already dressed for travel, a small bundle of supplies at her feet. "You're leaving," he said, his heart dropping. "I will not bring this hunt down on your town," she said, not looking at him, her jaw tight. "Crane will not be the last. Ragnar's bounty draws every greedy blade on this road. I have seen towns burn for less than the coin he is offering. Gromma, do not." Her voice cracked just slightly, the first crack he had ever heard in her. "Do not ask me to stay and watch you die for my pride, Ezekiel. I have already cost one clan its peace by refusing a claim. I will not cost you your life as well." Ezekiel crossed the small space between them, and before she could step back, took her face gently in both his hands, a bold thing, a thing he had never quite dared before. But the fear of losing her before he'd even properly begun to have her drove him past his own caution. "Listen to me," he said. "I am not asking you to stay for my sake alone. I'm telling you that I am not letting you walk into winter alone to be hunted down like an animal while I stand safe behind a wall doing nothing. If you run, I run with you. If you stay and fight, I stand beside you. Those are the only two choices I'll accept, so you might as well save your breath arguing me out of the second one." Gromma's eyes searched his face in the dim lantern light, amber catching gold, and something in her rigid shoulders finally, slowly, eased. "You would give up everything," she said softly. "Your post, your town, your home." "None of that has ever felt like home the way standing next to you does," Ezekiel said, and it was the truest thing he had ever said in his life. "Stay, please. Let me help you end this instead of running from it." For a long moment she simply looked at him, and then slowly she leaned into his hands, closing the last small distance between them, and kissed him. It was not gentle. There was too much fear and fierceness and 4 months of loneliness behind it for gentleness, her hands fisting in the front of his tabard, his own arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the whole world with nothing but his own ordinary body. And when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in the cold lantern light, Gromma let out a rough, shaking laugh. "Ordinary," she murmured against his mouth. "You are the least ordinary man I have ever known, Ezekiel Fletcher." "Stay," he said again, quieter now. "I will stay," she said, "but not to hide behind your walls. If Crane wants to make a spectacle of hunting me, I will give this town a spectacle it will not soon forget." 3 days later, that spectacle came due, and it very nearly cost them everything. Silas Crane, tired of waiting for Captain Marsh to hand Gromma over quietly, brought his men and a hastily assembled crowd of coin-hungry onlookers into the Thistledown Crossing Market Square on a cold, bright morning, dragging with them a length of heavy iron chain and an announcement that he intended to collect his bounty, one way or another, before nightfall, law or no law. He had, it turned out, spread word through every wayhouse on the road that there would be a reckoning in the market square, a bounty hunter's show of force meant to shame Marsh's garrison into surrender and terrify the town into compliance. And by mid-morning, nearly half of Thistledown Crossing had gathered along the square's edges to watch, some out of fear, some out of the same ugly curiosity that drew crowds to any public cruelty. Gromma walked into that square of her own will, Ezekiel at her side, Captain Marsh and a dozen uneasy guardsmen flanking them, and the crowd's murmur turned to a low, hungry hum at the sight of her. "There she is," Crane called out, grinning, gesturing his 4 men forward with the heavy chain uncoiling between them like a promise. "Come quiet, Frostwolf, and it'll go easier." "Come and make me," Gromma said, and her voice carried across the square like a blade being drawn. What happened next would be told and retold in every wayhouse and shrine town along the Pilgrim Road for years afterward, embellished with each telling, until some versions had her tearing down the market well itself, though the truth needed no embellishing at all. Crane's men rushed her in a practiced formation meant to overwhelm and bind, two coming from the sides with the chain stretched between them to snare her legs, one from behind with a net, Crane himself circling with his crossbow raised. Gromma moved like something the crowd had never imagined a person could move, ducking under the chain and driving her elbow into the ribs of the man on her left hard enough to lift him off his feet and send him crashing through a fruit seller's stall in an explosion of splintered wood and scattered apples. The net thrower barely got his weapon half unfurled before she seized the heavy iron chain meant for her own legs, wrenched it whole from the second man's grip, and swung it in a wide arc that took his companion off his feet entirely, sending him sprawling unconscious across the cobblestones. The market square had gone utterly silent, the hungry murmur of moments before choked into stunned, disbelieving stillness. Somewhere a dropped basket of eggs cracked against the stones, the only sound besides Gromma's controlled breathing. Crane, pale now, leveled his crossbow at her chest with a shaking hand. "Stand down, or I'll put a bolt through you and take my 100 crowns for a corpse instead." "Ezekiel," Gromma said without taking her eyes off Crane, "step back." "Not a chance," Ezekiel said and moved instead, planting himself directly between the crossbow and Gromma's chest, spear lowered, close enough now that Crane would have to shoot through him first. The crowd's collective gasp was audible. "Move, boy," Crane snarled, hand tightening on the trigger. "No," Ezekiel said, and his voice did not shake, though every part of him wanted it to. "You'll have to go through me. And even then, you'll have to reckon with a garrison captain and a town charter and every person in this square who just watched 4 armed men fail to take one woman who never raised a hand until you forced her to. There's no bounty worth what this will cost you, Crane. Ride out now and live to spend what coin you've got left." For a long, terrible moment, nothing moved. Then slowly, the last of Crane's remaining man, the half-orc tracker, who had watched his 3 companions go down in under a minute, and had clearly done a swift and sensible recalculation of the odds, backed away, hands raised, and mounted his horse without a word. Crane's crossbow wavered. "This isn't finished," he spat, lowering the weapon at last, fury and humiliation twisting his face as he looked from Ezekiel to Gromma and back, and then out at the silent, staring crowd that had just watched him fail utterly and publicly. "Ragnarok will send more than 4 men once word gets back that she's still loose. He'll send a warband, and there'll be no green-skinned guardsman lover standing in their way." He gathered his fallen men, loaded them onto their horses, and rode out of Thistledown Crossing without his bounty, without his dignity, and without a single coin, and the market square remained dead silent until long after the sound of hoofbeats faded down the Pilgrim Road. Then, astonishingly, an old woman near the front of the crowd, the very same woman who had made a warding sign against Ezekiel weeks before, began, hesitantly, to clap. Others joined, uncertain at first, then with growing warmth, until the square rang with applause for the fierce orc woman who had stood her ground and the ordinary guardsman who had stood in front of her. Gromma looked at Ezekiel, breathing hard, chain still coiled in one fist, and something in her face had cracked open entirely, astonishment, and underneath it, a fierce, unguarded gratitude that she had never expected to feel toward any human, in any town, ever again. "You stood in front of a loaded crossbow for me," she said, quiet beneath the crowd's noise. "I told you I would," Ezekiel said. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met," she said, "or the greatest fool." "Maybe both," he admitted, and she laughed then, a real laugh, rich and unguarded, and reached out to grip the front of his tabard and pull him into a fierce embrace right there in the square, in front of the whole watching town. And if anyone still harbored doubts about the guardsman and the orc woman, the sight of her holding him like something precious silenced them as thoroughly as her chain had silenced Crane. Crane's threat proved no idle boast. Word traveled the pilgrim road faster than any horse could ride, carried by pilgrims and merchants and wayhouse keepers eager to share the tale of the orc woman who had broken 3 bounty hunters in the Thistledown market square. And inevitably, it reached the ears it was never meant to reach. A trading caravan bound for the western passes carried the story to a Frostwolf hunting party 3 weeks later. And from there, within a fortnight, to War Chief Ragnock Skarn himself. Ezekiel and Gromma did not know this yet. In the golden, stolen weeks that followed the market square confrontation, weeks that felt, to both of them, like the first true peace either had known in years. Captain Marsh, moved by the crowd's turned sentiment and his own long-simmering respect for Gromma's usefulness and courage, formally registered her as a paid scout of the Thistledown garrison, giving her a legal standing on the road that no bounty hunter could easily challenge without answering to the Crown's own peacekeeping charter. She moved out of the leaking grain shed and into a small stone cottage at the garrison's edge that Ezekiel helped her fix up with his own hands, mending the roof and building a proper hearth. And in the evenings after patrol, they sat together by that hearth, sharing meals, sharing stories. She told him of her father, a hunter beloved by the whole clan, dead now these 3 years in a border skirmish, of her mother who had died birthing her, of the particular loneliness of growing up skilled and strong and unclaimed by any warrior's affection, until Ragnock had decided, coldly, that her strength would make a useful alliance rather than seeing her as a woman worth loving for herself. "He never once asked what I wanted," she told Ezekiel one such evening, firelight dancing across her face, her boots off, feet stretched toward the hearth in a posture of ease he had never seen her allow herself before. "Not once in all the years he watched me grow into a warrior worth claiming. You are the first person who has ever simply asked." "Then I'll keep asking," Ezekiel said, "as often as you'll let me." It was on such an evening, 3 weeks after the market square, that their careful, building affection finally found its fullest expression. He had reached for her hand across the small table, as had become their habit, and she had turned it, as she often did, to lace her fingers through his. But this time she did not stop there. She rose from her chair, drawing him up with her, and stood close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, could see the firelight catching gold in her amber eyes, could smell wood smoke and leather and something warmer beneath it that was simply her. "Ezekiel Fletcher," she said, low and rough, "I have spent 4 months running from every hand that reached for me, certain that any claim offered would cost me my freedom, my pride, myself. You have never once tried to claim me. You have only ever offered to stand beside me." Her free hand rose to trace the line of his jaw, careful of her own strength, a tenderness in the touch that made his breath catch. "I find that I no longer wish to be the only one who reaches." "Gromma," he breathed, and she silenced him with a kiss far softer than their first, unhurried, deep, full of the accumulated weight of every stolen glance and careful touch of the past weeks. And when they finally drew back for breath, both trembling slightly, she pressed her forehead to his. "There is a custom among my people," she murmured, "when a warrior chooses her own mate rather than accepting a claim forced upon her. She marks him, not with a chain or a cord, but with her own hand freely given, and he may accept the mark or refuse it, and either way there is no shame in the asking." She drew back just enough to look him fully in the eye, searching, suddenly uncertain in a way he had not seen since the day he'd bandaged her arm on the shrine steps. "I am asking, Ezekiel, not because Ragnock tried to claim me and failed. Because I have never wanted anything the way I want to be yours, and to have you be mine freely, both of us choosing it." "Yes," Ezekiel said, before she had even fully finished, his voice thick with emotion he made no effort to hide. "Gromma, yes. I've wanted to be worth choosing my whole life. I never thought it would be someone like you who taught me what that felt like." She kissed him again, fierce and certain this time, and drew him with her toward the hearth's warmth. And what passed between them that night was neither rushed nor rough, but slow, reverent, both of them learning the other with careful hands and softly spoken words. His fingers tracing the old scars along her shoulders earned in battles he would never have to fight, hers mapping the ordinary strength of him, the steady heartbeat beneath his ribs that had never once faltered when it mattered. When at last they lay tangled together before the dying fire, her head resting against his chest, his arms wrapped around her with a possessive tenderness neither had words for, Gromma pressed a mark into the skin of his shoulder, not a wound, but the careful press of her tusks against his collarbone, a claiming bite gentle enough to leave only a faint bruise, a mark that among her people meant chosen, meant mine, meant beloved. And Ezekiel felt it settle into his skin like a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. Mine, she murmured against his skin, half asleep, utterly unguarded in a way he suspected she had never allowed herself to be with anyone. Yours, he agreed, and meant it with everything he had. The warband arrived 11 days later on the first true snow of the season. There were 30 of them, mounted on shaggy mountain horses, orc warriors in full battle leathers with axes and spears catching the pale winter light, and at their head rode war chief Ragnak Skarn himself, his bear pelt cloak dusted with snow, his face set in the cold, satisfied fury of a man who had traveled a long way to reclaim something he believed was rightfully his. The pilgrim road below Thistledown Crossing had never seen anything like it, pilgrims and merchants scattering into the tree line at the sight of 30, mounted orc warriors bearing down on the small border town, wayhouse keepers barring their doors, and Captain Marsh's entire garrison turning out onto the walls with what weapons they had, though everyone present understood with sick clarity that a dozen town guardsmen stood no real chance against 30 seasoned warriors if it came to open battle. Gromma was waiting for them on the road outside the town gates before they even reached the walls, Ezekiel at her side, refusing every plea from Marsh, and the frightened town council to hide behind the garrison's stone walls while they negotiated. She would not hide. She had told Ezekiel as much the moment word reached them of the approaching warband, her jaw set, her eyes hard with a fury and fear she did not bother to disguise from him anymore. "If he wants me," she'd said, "he will have to look me in the eye to take me, not drag me out from behind your walls like a coward." "Then I'm standing there with you," Ezekiel had answered, and there had been no argument left to have. Ragnak reined his horse to stop 20 paces from where they stood, his warband fanning out behind him in a wide, menacing arc across the snow-dusted road, and for a long moment father and exile, chief and refused claim, simply looked at one another across the cold winter air. "Gromma," Ragnak said finally, and there was something almost like satisfaction in his voice, as though her continued survival and defiance were somehow proof of his own good judgment in choosing her, once, long ago. "You have made quite a name for yourself on this road, breaking bounty hunters in a human market square. It seems even in exile you cannot help but bring me shame." "You brought yourself shame the moment you struck a woman for saying no to you in front of your whole clan," Gromma said, her voice steady though Ezekiel could feel, standing close beside her, the tension coiled through her entire body. "I owe you nothing, Ragnak, not obedience, not deference, not my life. The old law says otherwise." Ragnak's gaze flicked dismissively to Ezekiel. "And what is this? The human dog they say you have taken up with. Word reached me even of that particular disgrace." He laughed, short and ugly. "A green-skinned warrior of Frostwolf blood, bedding down with an ordinary human guardsman who could not lift a war axe if his life depended on it. You have fallen further than I imagined possible." Ezekiel felt heat rise in his face, but it was Gromma who answered first, her voice cracking like a whip across the winter air. "He has stood between me and a loaded crossbow, Ragnak. He has stood beside me in a market square against 4 armed bounty hunters. He has never once tried to claim me, own me, or silence me for speaking my mind, which is more than you managed in all the years you called yourself worthy of my hand." Her chin lifted, proud and unbroken. "I would rather spend my whole life beside one ordinary human who sees me as a woman worth choosing than spend one more night bound to a chief who only ever saw me as a prize worth owning. Ragnar's face darkened with fury, and his hand dropped to the haft of the war axe strapped across his saddle. Then you leave me no choice but to collect what is owed to me the old way. 30 warriors against your one human dog and a handful of frightened town guardsmen. This ends today, Gromma, one way or another. Wait, Ezekiel said, stepping forward before he had fully decided to, his heart hammering so hard he was certain the whole road could hear it, but his voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. Before you spill blood over an old law, Chief Ragnar, answer me this. What does your own honor say about a chief who needs 30 warriors to reclaim one woman he could not even convince to want him with his words alone? The warband stirred at that, a low murmur rippling through the mounted orcs, and Ragnar's eyes narrowed dangerously. Careful, human, I could have your tongue for less. I'm not trying to insult you, Ezekiel said, though every instinct screamed at him that he very much was. I'm asking you to think about what it says about your claim if it takes 30 armed warriors and a chain to enforce it. A claim that has to be forced isn't a claim at all, it's a theft. Everyone here watching knows it, your own men included, whether they say so or not. Ragnar's jaw worked, fury and something else, doubt, perhaps, or the sting of a truth he did not want to hear warring behind his cold eyes. And for a long moment the road was silent but for the wind and the shifting of horses. Then from among Ragnar's own warband, an old orc warrior with gray-streaked hair and a scarred face nudged his horse forward a step. Ezekiel recognized from Gromma's stories the shape of the man before she even spoke his name. Thrak, Gromma breathed, surprised. I fought beside your father for 20 years, Gromma Frostwolf, the old warrior said, his voice carrying gravel and age. He would not have wanted to see his daughter dragged home in chains for the crime of refusing a claim she did not want. He turned his scarred face toward Ragnar, and there was no fear in it, only the weathered authority of a man who had earned the right to speak plainly to his chief. The human speaks truth, Ragnar, however little you wish to hear it from his mouth. A claim taken by force is no claim of honor. It is theft, as he says, and every warrior here knows the old songs say the same, if you care to remember them. More murmurs rippled through the warband, several warriors exchanging glances, and Ezekiel realized with a jolt of hope that Ragnar's authority over these 30 men was perhaps not so absolute as it appeared. That pride and old law were one thing, but 30 warriors riding into a human border town to drag off an exiled woman by force, over a claim their own honored elder called theft, was quite another. Ragnar looked around at his own warband, at the uncertain faces, the lowered eyes of men who would follow him into battle against an enemy but balked, it seemed, at this, and something in his rigid fury finally cracked, not into acceptance, but into a bitter, cornered recognition that he could not win this particular fight without losing something greater, the loyalty of his own warband, the respect that kept him chief at all. Fine, Ragnar spat, wheeling his horse with barely restrained violence. Keep her, human dog. Keep your exiled orc bitch and see how long your soft human life lasts beside a woman built for war. She will grow bored of your weakness soon enough, and when she does, do not expect Frostwolf to take her back. He raised his voice, addressing Gromma directly one final time, though he would not meet her eyes. You are dead to your clan, Gromma. No Frostwolf blood remains in you. Remember that when your human dies of old age long before you do, and you are alone again with no clan left to return to. I would rather have 20 years beside a man who chose to stand with me, Gromma said, unflinching, than a lifetime beside a chief who only ever wanted to own me. Ride home, Ragnar. There is nothing left here for you to claim. For a long, taut moment, Ezekiel thought Ragnar might charge anyway. Honor and reason both burned away by pure wounded pride. But the old warrior Thrak moved his horse fractionally closer to his chief's, a silent, immovable presence that seemed to remind Ragnar of exactly how thin the ice beneath his authority had become. And at last, with a final snarl of fury swallowed down, Ragnar turned his horse and rode north. back toward the mountains, and after a long moment of hesitation, his warband followed. Thrak lingered a moment longer, looking down at Gromma with something that might have been pride, might have been sorrow, might have been both at once. "Your father would be proud of you, Gromma Frostwolf," he said quietly, prouder of this than he ever would have been of a forced claim cord. He glanced once at Ezekiel, a long, assessing look. "Guard her well, human. She is worth more than any bounty ever placed on her head." "I know it," Ezekiel said. "Every day." Thrak nodded once and turned his horse to follow the retreating warband, and then the road was empty again but for falling snow and the sound of Gromma's ragged, relieved breathing beside him. She turned to him then, and the fierce warrior who had faced down a war chief and 30 warriors without flinching crumpled just slightly against his chest, her arms coming around him hard enough to lift him half off his feet, her face buried against his neck, and he felt rather than heard the shaking breath she released. "It is over," she said, muffled against his skin. "After 4 months, it is finally over." "It's over," Ezekiel agreed, holding her as tightly as she held him, right there in the falling snow on the open road with the whole town watching from the walls, not caring who saw, not caring about anything except the solid, living warmth of her in his arms. "You're free, Gromma, really free." She drew back just enough to look at him, snow catching in her dark hair, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears she would not quite let fall. "Free," she repeated, testing the word, and then, quieter, "free and chosen and yours if you will still have me." "Always," Ezekiel said, and kissed her there in the snow, in front of the whole town, in front of the retreating warband still visible on the northern road, sealing a promise that needed no clan law, no claim cord, no chief's blessing to be real. Winter settled properly over Thistledown Crossing in the weeks that followed, and with it came a quiet the town had not known in months. No bounty hunters, no warbands, no whispered fear in the market square, only the ordinary rhythm of a border town preparing for the cold season, and within it, a fierce orc woman and an ordinary guardsman building a life together that neither had quite dared to imagine possible before the pilgrim road brought them into each other's path. Captain Marsh, in a gesture that surprised the whole garrison, formally offered Gromma a permanent position as lead scout of the Thistledown Patrol, a role no orc had ever held in a human garrison along this stretch of the border, and she accepted it with a fierce, quiet pride that Ezekiel had come to recognize as one of the truest expressions of her joy. The townsfolk, slowly, grudgingly, and then with growing genuine warmth, came to know her not as the monster Crane's bounty poster had painted nor the exile Ragnar's cruel words had promised she would become, but as the woman who kept their roads safe, who mended Widow Halloway's fences without being asked twice, who stood at the market well on cold mornings, trading good-natured insults with the guardsmen who had once feared her and now counted her a friend. But it was not in Ezekiel's nature, nor in Gromma's restless warrior heart, to settle entirely into the quiet, contained life of a border town, however much peace it offered. The pilgrim road stretched on beyond Thistledown Crossing, mile after mile of shrines and wayhouses and travelers in need of protection, bandits still lurking in the deep tree line, other exiles perhaps still running from claims and chiefs and cruelties, no less unjust than the one Gromma had escaped. And one clear morning in early spring, as the last of the snow melted from the garrison walls, Gromma found Ezekiel checking the straps on 2 saddled horses in the stable yard. One his own familiar gelding, the other a rangy, strong-shouldered mare she had been quietly training for weeks without telling him why. "Going somewhere?" she asked, arms crossed, though there was no real question in her tone, only warmth and anticipation and the particular fondness that had become as natural to her as breathing. "Thought we might," Ezekiel said, tightening the last strap and turning to face her, the spring sunlight catching gold in his fair hair, the faint scar of her claiming mark still visible at his collarbone where his shirt hung open. "Captain Marsh mentioned there's trouble further down the road, past Elder's Bend, A whole stretch of the pilgrim route where the wayhouses have gone quiet, pilgrims not making it through to the shrine at St. Ilva's. Could be bandits. Could be worse. He held out his hand to her, the same gesture he'd made that very first day on the shrine steps, offering rather than demanding. I thought, since you're the finest scout this garrison's ever had, and since I happen to be fairly attached to the woman wearing that title, that maybe it was time the two of us went and found out what's happening together. Not as garrison business. As us. Gromma looked at his offered hand, then at the two saddled horses, then at the open road stretching south beyond the town walls toward all the shrines and dangers and unclaimed miles of the pilgrim route, and something fierce and joyful lit her whole face. You would give up your post, she said, your garrison pay, the safety of these walls, to ride an open road with an exiled orc woman and no guarantee of what waits at the end of it. I gave up thinking of safety as more important than you a long time ago, Ezekiel said. Besides, I've spent my whole life being the guardsman nobody noticed, walking the same wall every night. I'd rather spend the rest of it riding beside the fiercest woman I've ever known, seeing what's past the next bend in the road, than die of old age never having left Thistledown Crossing at all. Gromma took his hand, swung up onto the mare's back with the easy, powerful grace that had first stolen his breath on that rain-soaked road so many months ago, and looked down at him with amber eyes bright with love and mischief both. Then let us go find out, Ezekiel Fletcher, she said, what waits past the next bend. Together. He mounted his own gelding, and side by side, with no war chief's claim hanging over her, no bounty on her head, no clan law binding either of them to anything but the choice they had made freely, over and over in a market square, in a snow-dusted road, in a small stone cottage by a warm hearth. They rode out through the Thistledown gates and onto the open pilgrim road, southward, toward whatever adventure and danger and shared life awaited them beyond the horizon, two people who had found. Against every cruel word a war chief had ever spoken, exactly the kind of claiming that mattered most. The kind freely given and freely kept by two hearts that had chosen each other and meant to go on. Choosing each other for as long as the road ran on. Behind them, Thistledown Crossing settled back into its ordinary spring rhythms, the memory of a fierce orc girl and the guardsman who refused to let any war chief claim her already hardening into local legend, told and retold at the market well, and the tavern hearth for years to come. But ahead of them the road stretched wide and unwritten, and Gromma Frostwolf rode it at last not as an exile fleeing a hunt, not as a prize to be claimed by force, but as a woman freely chosen and freely choosing, with Ezekiel Fletcher's hand steady in hers and his whole ordinary, extraordinary heart fully, finally, hers.